the meeting to order. Joan Ensign is not here this evening. Mark Ensign, or Mark Hetzel is not here. Dave Betcher is sitting in for Mark Hetzel. So we do have a quorum. Approval of the minutes. So moved. Second. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Roll call. Approval of the agenda. Public comments. No public comments. And then see, why don't you take us into budget update? Just remember, 59 minutes.
Jack, we're going to do 55, so you can say they were faster. So this item is really quick. I like to just always keep the board members informed on where we are in the current fiscal year. This is just a quick note to say that as of the end of December, no expenditures have come from the contingency fund that the board designates on an annual basis. And there's really been no other significant changes that have taken place. We talked last month that the additional paraeducators at Arboretum were funded from ESSER 3 funds for special education. So we're halfway through the fiscal year and there really has not been anything significant that has come up that has caused a financial concern at all. So we're in really good shape. Anyone have any questions at all about anything regarding this year?
No.
Okay. So we're going to jump down to the timeline real quick. I'm just going to open this up and just share with you that tonight we're taking a look at some of the expenditure projections. Remember last month in December, we took a look at the revenue projections. As a reminder, the budget committee has requested a 3-year planning process to come forward in May. And the first piece of that is the staffing request that we are asking the administrative team to put together. Those are due January 14th. This committee did take a look at the template that we were sharing with the admin team. Had a couple suggestions. We've made those changes. And at the February committee meeting, you will see a first look at those staffing requests that have come in. So as of right now, planning is moving forward as we have discussed, and I have no changes to recommend this time. Anyone have any questions at all? Okay. Oops, did I click too far out, Rebecca?
No.
I'll turn it back over to you. I was gonna say she's not giving me that mic again. Okay. That's right. Mouse. Okay, so Jack and I had a discussion after the last board meeting. We wanted to put this topic for discussion. As board members are aware, at the last couple of board meetings, we've had committee reports that have come to the board level that have included expenditures for the following fiscal year. As an example, the curriculum committee brought forward new course proposals for the high school, and those were actually put on hold. Recommendation by the committee put on hold to wait and see where we were with the budget planning process. And then the co-curricular committee brought forward requests for some expenditures as well. Those were approved. And one of the discussions that Jack and I had was how we would want to consider aligning our processes so that board committee work feeds into the budget planning process. Randy has reminded us as well that those are all outlined in policy. So things are coming forward at a specific period of time based on past practice and what the board policies have asked administration to do. So we wanted to have a discussion about whether or not you want to see some future alignment regarding board committee work and the budget committee's interest in having a 3-year planning process. So Jack, why don't you?
Well, I think
speak
in
to
the
this?
process of looking more visionary, because what we've done since I've been on the board is every year you just kind of come up with ideas and throw things together. And we've always talked about how do we make investments, you know, and you know, by having a 3-year planning process, it seems like you can start either socking money away, you know, so that, or you can start implementing different different programs or whatever that might be. So I think in order to do that, you know, we really have to look at our policies so that things feed into the budget process.
And one of the things like with new cars proposals like Steve brought up, part of those come forward and they usually they're right now in practice as they come in the fall. And then as they're approved, the registration process, because these are all high school classes, are going in the registration book, which gets printed in January. So that's kind of the why they come. And if you put them on hold, then the question is, do you put them in there to see who's going to sign up? And then if it's funded, you run with it, or you have kids sign up for something, then you're redoing schedules. So that's kind of the key. So I just think I agree, we should align those, because that's probably been the one that's driven more on a consistent basis. And some of those require full teaching positions as those get implemented. Co-curricular ones, we have that 3-year establishment period, and then they usually have a stipend that goes with it. The one thing that came this year was that reorganization kind of the co-curricular positions at the drama level. That had a larger price tag to it. But again, those right now are to come, I believe, in October, that policy. And I think I agree with you, Jeff. We need to line them up. I've got to think about what's the appropriate timeline to line them up, so that we can make sure that when they come to the approval process, that then it makes sense for moving forward. So it could be a piece that they still follow that timeline for presentation. And if the board is generally okay with the programs, then they get put on the list for consideration of the budget.
Well, I mean, if we approved, like, let's take the drama one.
Yeah.
We approved it in October.
Right.
Right? So by the time it's gonna have to be funded, you're not talking about funding it until next fall.
You're not, yeah. It's
Which means it would be part of this coming budget planning cycle anyway.
money over, yeah, right now the money would go in there. So you still have the option on those to say, for that, for example, if you said we need to hold a year, you still have the ability to do it. Because it's not for the current year, it's for next school year. But I think we have to be more purposeful in when we approve something, how does it then fit into the budget piece? The co-curricular one's easier to figure out than the new course proposal, because that lines up with an approval process and then a registration process that takes place before the budget's complete. That's probably the one.
But are you targeting here, Jack? Are you looking at the fact that you want to see these things 3 years out?
Well, I think what you're looking at a 3-year plan.
So in other words, if a
Yeah.
co-curricular like this drama thing came up, your thought would be that if we approved it, it doesn't take effect for 3 years because it doesn't get into the budget cycle because it wasn't planned 3 years in advance.
Well, I think what you're doing is you're coming up with a 3-year plan, you know, what's happening today, right? And say, hey, this is our vision for the next 3 years. So we can start looking at we as a board can start looking at what are the priorities. You know, how do we fund these priorities? Because, you know, this year has been a relatively good budget year, right? Because we get federal dollars and we came out good. We have the referendum. Next year might be a little tougher budget year. You know, if you know something doesn't necessarily change. So what are the board's priorities, you know, in this budget process? And you know, maybe what you do is you bring that budget. You know, we vote on the budget in October, right? We passed the budget in October. Maybe, you know, instead of waiting till January, to start your, priorities, your people are looking, so that you can hit this in November. Because, they're putting their priorities together in November. You're kind of wrapping up last year's budget, and then you hit the ground running. And things are gonna either fall out, because there's lack of interest, or we just don't have the funds, or something could be moving forward.
And
It's
Jack,
just like business plan.
right, and if I could just speak to a little bit about what you were saying, Jack, and I'm gonna use the high school coursework as an example. If it was part of a more comprehensive view, there's 100 things we could do to fund those courses that came at the high school. If we were looking at this in total, right? So as an example, if the board said that these two courses are a top priority for us, we mentioned priorities. If these are a priority for us, I could simply say, instead of buying 15 copy machines this summer, we're gonna buy 10. That just took care of the two courses, right? That's listening to the board on what your priorities are. If, however, instead, you would come forward and said, our priority is to fund special ed parapay. We are hearing that this is an issue. We need to do something about it. You would probably rather fund that than something co-curricular wise. But it's really about getting it all in front of you at the same time, so you can take a look at it and determine your priorities. Is that fair, Jack?
That's fair. I think the other thing you look at too is, our janitorial positions, if, and we did this with paras probably about 3 or 4 years ago, where we identified that they were, under market. They're being paid under market, but we put in place a process where in several years they would be back to market. We're probably in the same situation with our janitors, where, if we're paying $16 an hour and you can go to McDonald's or some Quick Trip and get 15, with less hassle potentially. So I think when you start looking at it as a total picture, to your point, we can start making those decisions. And
I think it's fair that Randy and I work on this and try to find a way that we can, as we move forward, making sure that we take a look at this. And I described it to you, Jack, as we're looking at a 3-year budget planning process, we're going to have a few of these glitches that are going to come up, because looking at it from this lens is new to us. But I think we can work through all of it. But I agree. I think over the last couple of months, we saw, coursework at the high school being delayed, which probably we didn't need to do, and co-curricular programs being funded before Brian even had a chance to share with the HR committee information on market pay for positions, right? Like, we've got to get this all lined up in a process that makes sense.
Right. And it's more developing and defining the process.
Okay, so the next agenda item is a first look at some of the budget planning information for next year. Make this a little bit bigger. And I'm going to focus on just a few of the pages. We share some enrollment history with you. We share the current classroom student teacher ratios in K through 6. We share our current and historical staffing ratios, so you can just see where we're at this year and where we've been in the past. We share some high-level information about how a budget forecast is created. The committee last month took a look at enrollment projections, and we came up with an enrollment projection model to use during budget planning. So you've seen that before. That's this model shown against where we were this past September. What's important to start taking a look at then is how does that translate to next school year? And the interesting thing at the K through 6 level is that would result in no changes. So that budget planning estimate for student enrollment for next year would result in the need to add no classroom teachers in grades K through 6. We have 14 sections in every grade level except second. So we would need to have one second grade teacher transition to 3rd grade, or perhaps it wouldn't shake out that way due to retirements or resignations. But generally speaking, that section of 15 would move from 2nd grade to 3rd grade. Now, there are a few areas in here that we'd have to keep our eye on. 6th grade is projected to be at 23.9. That's 0.9 above the optimal. So that's a grade level that we'd have to keep our eye on. But if you look at the rest of them, they all line up pretty nicely, with the only other one that we have to watch is 1st grade. We typically have seen student enrollment growth between kindergarten and 1st grade. And so we'd have to keep our eye on that one as well. So it's 1st grade and 6th grade are the ones that we'd have to watch as the enrollments progress. So at a high level, this is what it looks like. In the past, I've asked for feedback on this to find out if there's anything here that you are uncomfortable with. As you look down for 7th and 8th grade and 9th through 12th grade. So the enrollment between grades 7 through 12 would typically generate about 1.36 FTE. However, the thing to keep in mind is that enrollment growth next year is at the middle school. And the middle school administration has shared with us that they do not want to increase FTE. They just don't have the room. They would like to continue with what they are currently doing. And so even though our model would project an increase at FTE at the middle school level, at this point, it is not something that the middle school administration is requesting. So at a high level, we could be moving into the next school year without too many changes in our classroom teachers all the way across our system. And I think that's some of the reason for that is we have invested in classroom teachers over the last couple of years. Our class sizes have been on the lower end of what our long-term numbers have looked like. And we're in really good shape with our teachers.
7th and 8th grade. The 2 largest classes we have are coming into 7th and 8th grade next year. Then you can see there's obviously there'll be some growth in the K6 ones, but that's why you're seeing that piece that Captain Mike kind of saying, well, we can stay with where we're at.
So at this point, at least on the FTE planning end, there's not a lot of changes that looks like we'd be bringing forward for next year. Anyone have any questions or feedback on this?
Just to reiterate your point, we carried some extra teachers at the elementary last year because during during last school year, we added some teachers to lower some class sizes, and we kept those in order to move forward into this year. We had some good staff, and we also felt that given coming out of the virtual year, that it was prudent to keep class sizes lower. So that's allowed us to really roll this forward without a lot of FTE.
And then I did want to, this is just, the principals like to look at this grade by grade and school by school. So that's just breaking it down. One of the things Joan asked for last year is if we could take the projections for the following year and actually do class size estimates by school. And that's what this is. So you can see at a school level. Now, it's really difficult to try to estimate where the move-ins would be based on our attendance boundaries, but this is really close. So you can see at each of the schools based on their current enrollment, adding in the anticipated growth, where we would be at class size. And again, that first grade is the one that we're going to be near the 22 at Arboretum and Heritage, around 20 Native Prairie, that we need to keep our eye on. And then also, just again, keeping our eye on 6th grade. So I would describe those are the 2 grades where Julie's continuously updating Randy on where we're at, so he knows in case we have to, look at adding a teacher. I want to just share with you, Jackie referenced before, if we end up having a tight budget year, what does that look like? So we talked at the last budget committee meeting in December that revenues between all sources are only going to be up about $110,000 next year. So if you look at what I would describe as typical increases, so about $1 million in pay increases, 150,000 in benefits, the 88,000 that the enrollment projection would estimate, transportation, utilities, that would be an expenditure increase of $1.3 million against $110,000 in revenues, or a $1.2 million deficit. So when you first look at this, this looks bad. But when we start diving into it, there's a lot of options that the school board, that we're going to be asking the school board for input on. I've got some notes here at the bottom, and then we'll talk about the next page. The transportation budget's a big one. We talked this fall that we only have 21 drivers. We have 26 bus routes budgeted for. That's where we were at pre-COVID. We have 19 bus routes, K4, and 21 that we're operating 512. We absolutely are right now overfunding our transportation budget. The question is do our parents, are they going to ask us to go back to where we were before, where more students were riding buses, or are our parents going to continue driving the kids to school like they have been? But at a minimum, we could be looking at $45,000 per route to reduce our transportation costs. We have 2 virtual ed staff members right now that are serving less than 10 students. So a decision is going to have to be made about whether or not we are offering a virtual ed program at the elementary schools next year, the way we've done it this year. That could potentially be $130,000 in savings if we don't keep doing that, or maybe we scale it back to 1 person. We talked at the last meeting about the district's contribution to our Fund 73. And then there's a variety of different approaches we could take. And what I wanted to share with you is just a sample approach that could be taken. So in this sample approach, and this is something Brian is going to be working on with the HR committee so they could see what this looks like. The board could approve the compensation plans that we have in place with our staff and not approve the inflationary increase at the same time and save that decision for later. Typically, they're both approved at the same time. One approach is to move people along the pay plan. So if you're a teacher, you get your points. If you're a custodian, you move from step 3 to step 4. We could do that for someone's first paycheck and then wait for the fall to find out where we are at with enrollment and everything else, and then look at the inflationary increase. That's an option. we could not add the 1.36 FTE that the model projects. That would take off 88,000. We can remove at least 2 bus routes, I believe, pretty easily. That'd be 90,000. The Fund 73 contribution, we could hold off on, that's 557,000. If we eliminated the 2 virtual ed staff positions, that's 130,000. If we just didn't replace copy equipment this summer, that's 60,000. Our technology budget's $1 million. If we held off on $250,000 and just had the Chromebooks last 1 more year, it's $250,000. And you've seen the reports on the carryover balances from our buildings or departments. If we remove $250,000, so all of a sudden a scenario that looks like we're $1.2 million in the hole and we're not going to be able to give pay increases, changes to a scenario that has a positive $762,000 balance. I am just showing this to you so that as we move forward over the next couple of months, we keep in mind that we are capable of doing a lot. I would not want us to shut down discussions on like new course approvals at the high school.
Right.
I would not want us to shut down discussions on priorities that the board has because we only have $110,000 worth of new money. We're going to have to challenge ourselves to look at the $56 million in existing money and how we're spending that money.
How do we reallocate it?
And how we reallocate it. So I'm just sharing this with you as an example. And we're going to be seeking feedback from the board over the next couple of months as we go on your thoughts and ideas on a variety of different topics. And just a quick share as an example, Brian is bringing forward an early retirement incentive next Monday night as an example of how we could reallocate dollars. The next agenda item is open enrollment. That's another example of how we can look at doing things a little bit differently. But we're going to keep bringing forward ideas to get your feedback so that we can move forward in a positive way and be able to implement program improvements for next year. Jack?
Couple quick questions. How long is the bus contract again and the insurance contract? Because the insurance must be coming up here pretty quick.
So you're referring to health insurance?
Health insurance.
Yeah, so Brian, you want to jump in on that?
We have, we're in year 4, year 5 of the agreement is next year.
And the bus contract, off the top of my head, I think we're in year 4 or 5 of our 7-year deal. But I can double check that for you. So just be aware of the fact that we're going to be continuously bringing ideas forward. As an example, the virtual ed that we offered this year for elementary students, is that a program that we want to continue? Do we want to scale it back from 2 FTE to 1? Do we want to continue offering 2? That's a decision that has to be made for next year. As the year has gone on, you've had fewer students in that program. There were more who initially signed up for it, but when you look and see how many students are in it now, it's very low demand for that. So that's a discussion point. And so we're going to keep bringing these discussion points forward and really seeking your feedback. But this is just an example of, I'm hoping that we can have discussions about reallocation, Jack, instead of shutting everything down that comes before us, because we can do things.
Right.
It just means we can't do something else that isn't as important to us anymore.
Well, and again, to your point, you see the entire picture. Now you can sit down and take a look and say, yeah, that makes sense to reallocate.
Any questions at all about this? Otherwise, I'll jump into the next topic. Nope. Rebecca, would you mind jumping back and we'll grab the open enrollment? So at the January school board meeting, the school board will be voting on open enrollment capacity. If you wouldn't mind opening that first attachment, Rebecca. And what I'm proposing is that we use the calculation model on the far left. In the end, I'll make that a little bit bigger. In the end, it doesn't really change too much. But what the difference is, so on the far left, oops. Right, but where's the bar at the bottom? Scroll that over. Oh, there it is. Thank you. So on the far left, that is a calculation based on our actual student count from this past fall. The calculation in the middle is based on the assumption that 100 new students will be joining us next year. The calculation on the far right is one that changes the school board policy on open enrollment. I don't think there's going to be a lot of interest at the board level for changing the policy. If you change the policy, you will increase class size, but you will increase the amount of open enrollment students that can enroll. But when you look at like second grade as an example, if you look to the calculation on the left, using the actual enrollment that we have in the district, that creates 2 open enrollment spots. If you use the calculation in the middle, again, which is based on 100 student growth, there's 0 enrollments for open enrollment in second grade. There's not a right or wrong way to do it. It's just a matter as far as what are you comfortable with. In the past, I've always used the approach in the middle, which is I take a look at our budget planning process, I take a look at the enrollment projection, and I use that for open enrollment. So past practice is the middle. Going to the left opens up a few more spots, and that is based on our actual student count. The calculations to the right open up quite a few more spots, but that results in a class size policy change, which again, I'm just showing it to you, but I don't think there'd be a lot of support for doing that.
No.
So I'm just looking at your feedback as far as the board meeting next Monday night. Does this committee have a recommendation to stay with our past practice, which is the middle? So as an example, 0 spots for second grade, or do you want to look to the left, which would have 2 spots? And when you think about it, open enrollment is just roughly $7,000, 2 additional students in second grade, and those spots would be filled if we opened up 2 spots. That would be an increase in revenues of $14,000. That would pay for some priority that would be coming forward. So it's a board level decision. Do you want us to be opening up a few more spots with open enrollment or not?
So the question is the middle one, is you adding roughly 100 students based on the fact that historically, we always gain a few students per grade as the years progress.
Exactly. Yep.
If we add 100 students and they do show up, those 100, if we take scenario 1, but then the 100 students show up, do we have to hire more teachers? When I'm looking at the numbers, would it cause our FTEs to go up? When I'm looking at the numbers, the only grade I see that happening in is 5th grade, where you would gain so many in 5th.
Did you include these in with your class size?
The middle ones, yes, not to the left.
Right, so you're looking at using the historical gain 100, which is the
Yep,
middle.
yep.
But if we went to your scenario 1 method, we'd be seeing a 10 number shift in 5th grade where we have 10 extra students that we would somehow have to put into classes that you could potentially start making a case that maybe we need another FTE in 5th grade.
Right, and so I see what your point is. The thing to keep in mind with either the left or the middle is it still uses the board's optimal class
Right.
size number as the cap. So even though the board's class size policy goes up to 25 in 5th and 6th grade, this calculation, even with that, only limits it to 23. But you're right, Dave, if you go with the calculation on the left, you're gonna have 2 more students in second grade, you're gonna have more students in 5th grade. Ultimately, that will change the class sizes in those grades, but not significantly, because we're dividing it out across 14 sections, and we're using the board policy optimal in the calculations to begin with. We do not use the maximums. So we still have room between the optimal, which is what the board asks us to target, and the maximum, which is the most that we seek to have in any classroom.
So if we had the growth that we normally expect, and we use the higher open enrollment, we still won't be looking at adding FTEs.
No, we would not.
So in my head, I'm sitting here going, that means 100 more students in Waunakee with no extra FTEs comes up to $700,000.
Yes, but the one thing I would share with you
If they all
is
show.
the numbers on the left are way higher in some levels than we would actually see. So we would
Right.
never see 40 some or even 30 some applicants in 3rd grade. We would maybe see 5 to 7. So where it's really going to make the difference is those 2 spots in 2nd grade would absolutely be taken if we looked at it on the left. Those 5th grade spots would probably be, I think you'd probably have interest in those.
But you're talking an extra 10.
You're right, you're talking like 10, again,
So-
across 14
So
sections.
now we're talking 12.
If you're looking at scenario 1, you got 27 slots there.
Right,
So, you could sit down and say, we want to go with this, but in reality, the center is your reality.
In between the two.
Yeah, what is that, scenario 3? That's the way you're planning today. And in all likelihood, we're probably not going to fill all this.
right, exactly.
Slots.
In all likelihood, we would not fill
So
those
I
slots.
would just go ahead with scenario 3, where you've been.
So that's the middle of this one.
See, I would go with scenario 1. Only because you're talking very few students. Again, as long as it doesn't cost us to have to go out and hire more teachers. If you have an empty seat sitting in a classroom, it costs the same amount to run that classroom. If a student's going to sit in there for $7,000, that helps us fund the next, adding on to the drama department or whatever we want to
I
do.
think what Steve is saying, though, no matter if you choose scenario 1 or scenario 2, you're not going to get 27 fifth graders.
No.
So in either one of those scenarios, you're never going to max out.
But you're never going to get
Middle school.
anybody, you're never going to get anybody in 2nd grade under scenario 3.
Right,
Or in scenario 2, you get a couple. You're never going to get anybody, well, 7th grade is probably not a number you're really going to get either. But when you go back down to 4th grade, 8 versus 18, you might get a dozen. I mean, we've turned down roughly how many in K through 6 is really where the numbers are.
right. We do turn down quite a few.
Those are the numbers where you're going to start seeing some effect.
I
So you're
think-
probably looking at most a dozen students total here.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
they,
kind of a piece of where do you want, if you're looking at this as a strategy that could mitigate some of the expenditures revenue issues, then you look at scenario 1 on the left, because it gives you at least a little bit more opportunity, because once you set the number, you can't change it. So even if there's more applicants, we can't deviate it. And you gotta decide kind of what's your tolerance then for those numbers. And I think that the risk at the upper level, you're not gonna get 25 increases. That's probably not gonna happen. People aren't open enrolling their kids out there. 4th grade's fine.
and the only other thing I just.
That's your piece.
Yeah, the only other thing I want to share, which may look odd to the public and to some board members, is the 7th and 8th grade and why there's openings. We have I'll use the term staffed up at the middle school. And so when you do the math on the number of core teachers that we have in 7th and 8th grade, and you divide it by the number of students, that creates openings in our class size policy. So that is following the policy. We verified it with the guidance counselors and the principals. At first, that may look odd because we have a very large 2 groups of students in at the middle school, but we've also staffed up from where we've been in the past, and we actually do have class size capacity in the 7th and 8th grade because of the staffing decisions we made in the last couple of years.
And if you look at it, if we did gain a dozen students, which is probably what you're looking at in what we've seen in the past years that we've turned down, that's $78,000. I mean, I'm sorry, $84,000. That pays for the whole benefit thing we were talking about reducing back under expenditures. That was $75,000. Where we're sitting there saying, well, we're gonna, cut down $75,000 in benefits for our staff. And 12 students would pay for that and cost us no FTEs. Why wouldn't you do that?
Well, I think I think another way that the community would look at it is you're putting these extra kids in there, and now you're saying you're overcrowded. Now you're going to build more buildings, which is more maintenance. So yeah, we're saving $68,000, but we're spending $80 million.
Yeah, but the middle school is a whole different question. It's overcrowded anyway.
But if you look at it from the community standpoint, that's what they're looking at.
Yeah, and we have heard that in the past, Jack.
We
I
have.
mean, in 2010, that was something Randy and I heard a lot about, was concerns about open enrollment. It's a fine line, it really is. I mean, obviously, we have to have an open enrollment policy. We have to admit students when we have the space.
Mhm.
Both scenario 1 and scenario 3 comply with our policy. The only difference is scenario 3 builds in the 100 additional students we typically see join us. Scenario 1 focuses on the students we have now. Either one of them makes sense and complies with our policy. It's just looking at when we have tight fiscal time. 7th grade is a great way to look at it, Dave. We will have more demand than 3 7th graders. So in the middle column, we're only allowing 3. Over to the left, we'd allow 12. We could get 12 applicants in 7th grade. That's a spot where people make decisions about their students' education. So by looking at the scenario 1 to the left, it does increase resources. And I think we can still state very clearly to the community, our overall open enrollment policy is conservative. We use lower class sizes than higher class sizes, and most districts do not limit this at all. We just are in a situation where we're very careful with open enrollment. This is something that you can think about. You both can think about it before next Monday. The rest of the board can think about it. If you're okay with, I can just put this in the board packet. If you think I could remove the far right and just say, we don't think anybody's going to do that, and we could just have both of those scenarios.
Well, could you not also, I mean, there's no reason we can't pick a combination of 1 and 3. And
Absolutely.
say the middle school, we're going to stay tight because it is the middle school. And yet we could allow the 4th and those grades where we do have the extra room and allow that.
You absolutely can. Yeah.
We did a little bit of that a year or 2 ago. I think we did some things with like Waunakee and some of our primary grades. We made a few decisions like that. Maybe we just bring these 2 scenarios and kind of have this conversation with the board.
Okay, that sounds good. Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind jumping back then. So the next agenda item we already did. So if you're okay with that, Jack, we'll skip it.
Skip.
The audit report is the next agenda item. There is one item on there I'm looking for feedback on. I'm gonna just pull up the letter. So the one thing to keep in mind is this required communication letter is a letter from the auditors to the school board. And so while the full audit document has a lot of numbers in it, if there's anything a board member really wanted to get from a takeaway, it's reading the letter that the auditor's writing to you about their audit process. This is where they identify suggestions, feedback, concerns. And there was one thing that they noted that I just want to share with you. Okay, it's under other matters. It's at the bottom of page 4, top of page 5, where our audit firm is saying cyber assessments, cyber threats are growing and becoming more sophisticated. And then you go down to the next page, they're suggesting, they highly recommend the school district complete a cybersecurity risk assessment. And that is their recommendation for us to consider. Tim Shell actually was looking at this information and shared with me that the DPI has the same thing on their recommendations. And Tim just handed this to me before the meeting, where the DPI has a recommendation as well that districts do this. One thing that's a little maybe unique about our district is we do outsource the security of our financial system to a company called IS Corp out of Milwaukee. So we don't house any data here regarding payroll, vendors, anything. It's housed at a very state-of-the-art facility. Infinite Campus is not housed on a server here. So we have our major systems outsourced. So that's one thing to just keep in mind. But this is the letter from the auditors to the board. There weren't any major issues identified from a financial standpoint, but they are sharing with you their recommendation on cybersecurity. At this point, administratively, we'd be asking as a board, what feedback do you have for us on this? They are stating our experts can assess the organization's controls, et cetera, et cetera. So they're saying this is a service they perform. There's other places that perform this service. At some point, we're going to be looking for your feedback on whether or not this is something you would like us to pursue.
I would feel more comfortable if we would pursue something.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Jack.
I would feel more comfortable if we would pursue, at least an assessment. I know we've had talks a number of times, over this.
Would you like us to ask our audit firm who wrote in the letter to the board, our experts can assess the organization's controls? Because that's something Allie would be able to work on and present that to you at our next meeting. Or would you like us to go outside of our audit firm and look at other options?
Well, I think you should get some pricing before
Just
you
go off the
jump at one, and then just say, what's their pricing? And then maybe check with other school districts, or DPI, what's a reasonable price in this area?
And if you do any of this in some of your consulting, you see something.
I have not.
You did not see that, but
Well, Allie's got her first project.
Yeah.
There you go.
Good thing you came tonight.
Yeah.
So we will,
just bring that.
I guess we know what you're
to-
doing at 7:50.
that's right.
okay, we will work on
I
this.
think you can wait till.
We gotta put her to work doing something.
Okay,
Is
did anybody have any other questions or comments about the audit?
No.
And then the last agenda item is just the feedback, where I'm asking for, as board members, are you finding value in, obviously your board book has tons of information in it every month. We've continued to put into there, quite a bit of information about the wellness clinic. And I'm asking, do you want us to keep doing that? Or is that something you would prefer that Brian, brings up with insurance committee meetings? I mean, it's a relatively small expenditure for the district, and we have quite a bit of information in each monthly board book about this topic. If you want to keep seeing it, we'll just keep doing it. But I guess I'm asking the question, do you want us to keep putting this into the packets every single month?
Well, I guess we did it at first because we were starting something brand new and you weren't really sure where it was gonna go. I think we're past that point. I don't think we're suddenly gonna turn off the wellness clinic if we see bad numbers for 3 months. I guess I'd be fine with changing it to the other one because I think we're past that period.
I would. How much effort is it to put that report together?
It's not much of an effort, but I just don't want to be piling more stuff into the board book that isn't something you're really wanting to look at every month. I mean, any board member can reach out to Brian at any time with information they want to know about it. But I just don't want to keep putting it in there if it's not a value.
I would recommend.
That's all we had for tonight.
Just make sure that people know that Brian's cell phone number at 608, what is that number?
Yeah, it's get up early. Write it on the board.
I refuse to make a motion to adjourn for 8 minutes, just to make sure you go past 1 hour. Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Let's go.
Dang it.
Shot myself in the foot there.